You're standing in a coffee shop in a completely foreign city, and you've practically rehearsed this exact moment in your head like 20 different times.
Oh, yeah. The classic mental
Right.
rehearsal.
You know the vocabulary.
Uh-huh.
You've got the grammar locked down. You've even run through the pronunciation while you're just walking down the street to get there.
You feeling ready?
Totally ready. But then the second you step up to the actual counter and the barista just looks you dead in the eye and says, next, your brain entirely wipes its own hard drive.
Just a complete blue screen of death.
Exactly. You just freeze. It's like this physical wall just drops down right between your thoughts and your mouth. And you end up, I don't know, just pointing at a random pastry and grunting.
It is honestly a universally humbling experience.
Yeah.
I mean, it leaves people wondering why all those hundreds of hours they spent on language apps just didn't translate to real life at all.
Yeah. Why does knowing a language intellectually, on paper and actually speaking that language feel like two completely, utterly unrelated skills? Because that is the exact friction point we are tackling today. Our whole mission for this deep dive is completely focused on chiasakak maulut noikwa, which means sharing effective speaking practice tips.
Right. And we are going way beyond the standard, like, just study your flashcards more kind of advice. We really want to figure out how you actually get words to physically come out of your mouth in real time under actual pressure.
And to do that, we are looking at a truly remarkable data set today.
We really are. We have access to the raw, unedited transcripts from this 10-day intensive program. It's called the Speak Up Sessions. It's technically a 30-day fluency challenge, but we are just isolating the source material from those critical first 10 days.
And what makes this particular stack of transcripts so incredibly compelling is just the intimacy of it. We are basically listening in on an English teacher named Masu, and he's guiding a learner named Fizu.
Yeah, this isn't some polished, theoretical, textbook dialogue.
Not at all. It captures the exact moments of hesitation. We see Fizu's specific grammatical stumbles, his apologies, his obvious frustrations. We are seeing the psychological hurdles that literally every single language learner faces, but documented in real time.
Which is so rare to see. That raw data gives us a direct window into the cognitive bottlenecks of language acquisition. So we're going to extract the exact methodology Meizu uses to take Fizu from this passive, frustrated listener to someone who can actively hold their own in a real conversation.
Right. So we are mapping out all the real-world examples, the major psychological shifts, and honestly, the actionable daily habits straight from this challenge. And I think the only logical place to start is right back at that coffee shop scenario.
The infamous freeze.
The freeze, yeah. Let's look at day one of the transcripts, because Fizu has a pretty decent vocabulary on paper, right? But he just cannot deploy it. Why does the brain, which clearly stores these words somewhere in its hard drive, just lock the file away when it's time to actually speak?
Well, the sources make a very compelling argument here, that the freeze isn't actually a language problem at all. It's a psychological problem.
Wait, really? Not a language problem?
No. I mean, when Fizu freezes on day one, Masu points out that learners panic because they are desperately trying to formulate the perfect grammatical sentence in their heads before they even allow themselves to open their mouths.
Oh, wow. So they are essentially trying to write like a finalized, heavily edited essay in their working memory before speaking a single syllable.
Exactly. And that creates this massive, crippling spike in anxiety. It's the fear of judgment, the shyness, the intense pressure to just not look foolish in front of another human being.
Nobody wants to sound stupid.
Right. And in the transcripts, Fizu actually vocalizes this explicitly. He says to Masu, I feel shy. Sometimes I forget words. Sometimes I think too much about grammar and I just stop talking. And when that happens, the affective filter goes up.
Okay, let's pause on that specific term, the affective filter. Because it sounds like, I don't know, a piece of machinery in a car engine or something. What is actually happening in the brain, like chemically or neurologically, when this filter goes up?
So think of it as a defense mechanism. And it's triggered by the amygdala.
Which is the emotional center.
Right, the emotional processing center of your brain. When you feel that social anxiety, the fear of sounding stupid to the barista, your amygdala actually perceives a literal threat, like a survival threat.
Just from ordering coffee.
Just from ordering coffee. It releases stress hormones like cortisol. And this physiological response literally impedes the functioning of your prefrontal cortex.
And the prefrontal cortex is where the language is stored.
Well, it's where your working memory and your complex cognitive planning happen. So you're basically asking your brain to do this highly complex task, right? Retrieving foreign vocabulary, applying syntactic rules. But at the exact same time, your emotional center is sounding a massive alarm that you are in mortal danger.
Oh man, so the alarm just overrides the cognitive processing.
Completely. The filter literally blocks the language from getting out.
So the spotlight hits you, and instead of just delivering your line, your brain is pumping you full of cortisol because it thinks the audience is a pack of wolves. We're
Yeah.
just paralyzed by a biological miscalculation.
Yeah, a biological miscalculation that is completely fueled by a false premise. The sources really emphasize this massive paradigm shift that Masu tries to instill in Fizu right away.
Which is what?
That fluency does not mean speaking perfectly. It means speaking comfortably and naturally.
Mm.
The perfectionism is what triggers the amygdala in the first place.
Okay, yeah. We see that perfectionism crippling Fizu all over the transcripts. But I really want to look at a specific anecdote from day 6 because it perfectly illustrates this fear of mistakes. And it's something I think literally every learner has done at some point.
Oh, the participle mix-up.
Yes. Fizu gets totally tangled up with participles. He's talking about trying to express that he had nothing to do, and instead of saying, I'm bored, he accidentally told a group of people, I'm boring.
It is such a classic error. I mean, the suffixes ed and ing, they serve very, very different functions in English adjectives, but they look almost identical to a new learner.
Right, because I'm boring characterizes your core personality, like you are an uninteresting person, whereas I'm bored just describes a temporary internal state, of understimulation.
Yeah, and the social consequence of that mistake is, well, it's hilarious, but also deeply mortifying.
I know. Imagine being at a party trying to casually mention you need some entertainment, and instead you just announce to the entire room, attention everyone, I am a profoundly uninteresting human being.
The mortification is so real, and that exact fear of embarrassment is what keeps learners completely silent. I mean, they would rather say nothing at all than accidentally call themselves boring. But Masu does something super vital here.
Right, he asks Fizu to analyze the actual fallout of the mistake.
Yes. He asks, what actually happened in that room when he said that?
Did the world end? Did they kick him out of the party? No. People probably just laughed a little bit, realized what he actually meant based on the context of the situation, and the conversation just moved forward.
Exactly. The connection was still made. The communicative goal was achieved despite the structural flaw.
Yeah.
And that is a massive, massive revelation for a learner.
We see another recurring struggle with the past tense in the source material, too. It just keeps popping up. In their morning routine discussions, Fizu constantly says, I wake up at 7 instead of I woke up at 7, even when he is talking about an event that happened hours ago. Or he'll say, I eat breakfast instead of I ate breakfast.
Yeah, the persistence of that specific error, it really comes down to cognitive load.
How so?
Well, in the heat of a conversation, the brain naturally defaults to the path of least resistance. And the simplest, most familiar form of a verb is the present tense. To apply the irregular past tense, like to change eat to ate, it requires this microsecond of cognitive calculation.
So you actually have to think, okay, this event is in the past, so I have to search my mental database for the irregular past tense of this specific verb, retrieve it, and swap it out.
And that calculation takes time. When your affective filter is high and you're nervous, taking a 3-second pause just to calculate a verb tense feels like an absolute eternity.
Oh, it feels awful.
So the brain just panics, grabs the nearest available word, which is the present tense, and throws it out there just to keep the conversation moving.
Okay, I get the mechanics of why the mistake happens, but I kind of need to push back on Masu's philosophy here for a second.
Sure, go ahead.
Because the takeaway from the text seems to be, embrace the mistakes, don't worry about it. But if we just run around proudly saying, I wake up yesterday and I am boring, aren't we just permanently hardwiring terrible grammar into our brains?
Well,
Doesn't the brain, fossilize those errors if we don't fix them immediately?
that is a very valid concern. And the fear of fossilization is a huge argument in traditional language pedagogy. It's exactly why traditional schooling focuses so heavily on red pen corrections.
Right, the teacher correcting every single mistake.
But the philosophy we extract from Masu in the source material challenges that head-on. His golden rule for Fizu is fluency first, accuracy second.
Okay, defend that for me. How does fluency first not just lead to a lifetime of speaking broken English?
Because mistakes are not the end point. They are the mechanism for the feedback loop. Masu explicitly tells Fizu, if you're not making mistakes, you're not practicing enough. When you speak and make a structural error out in the real world, you receive immediate organic feedback.
But what does organic feedback actually look like if someone isn't, explicitly correcting you like a teacher would? Because strangers aren't usually correcting your grammar on the street.
Well, it could be a confused look from your conversation partner, which prompts you to rephrase.
Yeah.
Or it could be them naturally repeating your sentence back to you correctly in their response. Like, oh, you woke up at 7.
Ah, I see.
Or, and this is the most important one, it can be the internal realization you get just from hearing your own voice out loud. Because when you keep the language trapped inside your head, it always sounds perfect. Speaking it aloud physically exposes the friction.
So you basically need the friction to create the spark for learning.
Exactly that. And the transcripts show this progression beautifully. By day 9, Fizu is talking about his morning and he says, I take a shower. Wait, no, I took a shower.
Oh, he catches his own mistake mid-sentence.
Yes, and that is a huge milestone. It is the highest form of language acquisition. That self-correction only happens because he built the habit of speaking first and evaluating second.
Right, because if he was still trapped in that day 1 behavior where he's just waiting until he could formulate the perfect past tense sentence in his head before opening his mouth, he never would have gained the reps necessary to start self-correcting.
Silence offers zero data for the brain to learn from.
That frames it so perfectly. The silence is actually worse for your long-term grammar than the mistake is. So the actionable takeaway from this first hurdle is that you basically have to fundamentally lower your standards for yourself when you are speaking. You have to willingly accept sounding a bit messy and unpolished. You kind of have to temporarily dismantle your own ego.
You absolutely have to be willing to be a beginner.
Okay, well, let's say I've done that. I've accepted my fate. I'm willing to make mistakes. I'm not paralyzed by fear anymore. But I still have this massive mechanical problem.
Which is?
Even if I'm not afraid, there is a huge lag time before I can respond to a question. I'm standing there, bravely ready to speak, but the words just aren't arriving fast enough to keep up with a normal human conversation.
Yeah. That brings us to the second major cognitive roadblock identified in the 10-day challenge.
Yeah.
And that is the internal translation engine.
This was so fascinating to read about. The sources pinpoint the act of translating from your native language into your target language and then back again as the absolute #1 speed killer.
It is devastating to fluency. And we need to look closely at the neurological costs of this habit. To really understand why it's so bad, let's break down the millisecond by millisecond reality of that translation lag.
Okay, let's do it.
Imagine you are Fizu, and someone asks you a very standard, totally predictable question in English, just, how are you today?
A basic greeting. The easiest possible prompt you could get.
Right. But if you are relying on an internal translation engine, your brain doesn't just hear, how are you today, and respond. It initiates this highly complex, multi-step bureaucratic process.
Bureaucratic process. I love that.
So, step 1, your auditory cortex processes the English sounds, and then you intentionally route that information to your native language center to translate it into a concept you actually understand.
So I literally have to translate the English words into my native language just to comprehend the question being asked.
Yes. Then step 2. Now that you're operating entirely within your native language, you formulate a response based on how you feel. Like, I'm feeling quite well today, thank you for asking.
Which is a very articulate, nuanced native thought.
Exactly. And step 3 is where the entire system just crashes. You now have to take that native language thought and route it back into the target language center. You have to hunt for the English vocabulary, conjugate the verbs, and arrange the syntax to match your native thought as closely as possible.
And then, finally, step 4, I send the signal to my mouth to actually speak the words out loud.
Right. And by the time you reach step 4, 3 or 4 seconds have easily passed. And in natural human conversation, a 3-second pause is an incredibly long time.
It feels like an hour.
It really does. The other person has already subconsciously noted the awkward silence. They might have even moved on or rephrased the question because they thought you didn't hear them. And because of that, you constantly feel like you're 3 steps behind the rhythm of the interaction.
It's like having an entire committee meeting in your head for every single sentence. Okay, we received the input, let's send it to translation. Translation has returned the document. Now let's draft a response. Send the draft to the foreign language department for localization. You just cannot have a fluid conversation if every thought requires bureaucratic approval.
That internal bureaucracy is exactly what Masu targets. The text provides a very specific exercise to bypass this completely, and it's called the dog method.
I loved this part of the transcript. So Masu tells Fizu that when he is walking down the street and sees a dog, his natural instinct is to look at the animal, think of the word for dog in his native language and then translate that word into English.
Yes, and Masu instructs him to just cut out the middleman entirely. When you see the animal, you shouldn't access your native language at all. You look directly at the fur, the tail, the ears, and you force your brain to map that visual stimulus directly to the English sound. Dog.
I want to dig into the mechanics of that, though, because how does the brain actually build that direct mapping? It honestly feels impossible to just turn off your native language.
It's definitely not easy. It requires actively building a brand new neural pathway. Think about how a toddler learns their very first language.
Okay, a toddler.
When a toddler sees a dog, they don't translate it from some pre-existing concept. Their visual cortex processes the image of the animal, and their brain directly links that image to the auditory sound dog that their parents are saying. They build a direct bridge between the physical object and the language.
So as adults, we already have this massive, heavily reinforced bridge between the image of the dog and our native language. And we just keep using that old bridge because it's sturdy and it's fast.
Precisely. You are using the old bridge and then building this tiny, fragile little footbridge from your native language over to English. Masu's dog method is demanding that you build a brand new direct suspension bridge from the visual cortex straight to the English vocabulary, entirely bypassing the native language territory.
And to help build that bridge, the sources introduce another vital concept, which is the simple English tip. And honestly, this felt like such a massive relief to read. The text aggressively advises learners to stop trying to sound like university professors.
Yeah, this targets a phenomenon we can call the complexity trap.
The complexity trap, I relate to this so much. Because in our native languages, we are fully realized adults, right? We are funny, we are sarcastic, we are articulate, we can express all these subtle shades of emotion. And when we learn a new language, our ego just demands that we project that exact same sophisticated personality.
We absolutely refuse to sound basic.
Right. So we have this thought like, I am exceedingly delighted by the prospect of this upcoming event. And we send that thought to the translation engine. And the engine just catches on fire.
Totally combusts.
Because we don't know the English equivalent for exceedingly, or we get tangled up trying to translate the grammar of prospect of this upcoming, and we freeze entirely because we just refuse to compromise on the nuance.
Masu's solution for Fizu in the source material is just ruthlessly pragmatic. When you have that complex thought, you must learn to instantly downgrade it.
Downgraded.
Just say, I am very happy.
It is so liberating. Just, I am very happy.
You are intentionally sacrificing a small degree of nuance for a massive, massive gain in fluency and speed.
Oh, wait, isn't there a danger here? If I always just say I am very happy, don't I permanently stunt my ability to express complex thoughts? Because I don't want to sound like a toddler forever.
No, it is a temporary scaffolding. It's not a permanent limitation. You have to establish the baseline of speed first. I mean, native speakers use simple English all the time in their daily mundane interactions. You do not need highly advanced SAT-level vocabulary to be a highly effective communicator.
That's true.
Once the simple pathway is lightning fast, like once you can say, I am very happy without a single millisecond of translation, then you can start gradually layering in the complexity. You can swap very happy for thrilled. But if you try to start at thrilled, you will stay stuck in the translation engine forever.
It reminds me so much of learning to play an instrument like the guitar. When you first start, you are entirely dependent on the sheet music. You look at the page, you see a specific dot on a line. Your brain has to translate that visual symbol, like, okay, that dot means a C sharp.
Right.
Then you have to translate that intellectual knowledge into a physical action. Okay, C sharp means my ring finger needs to press down on the 4th fret of the A string.
It is a highly sequential, heavily translation-based process.
And if you play a song that way, translating every single note individually before you actually move your hand, you are never, ever going to play smoothly. It will sound robotic, disjointed, and just awful. At some point, if you want to be a real musician, you have to stop looking at the sheet music. You have to learn to play by ear. You have to hear the chord progression in your head and just let your hands find the shape on the fretboard automatically.
That analogy maps perfectly onto cognitive linguistics. The internal translation engine is reading the sheet music. It is slow, it is mechanical, it is fraught with hesitation. Fluency is playing by ear. You hear the prompt, and your linguistic muscles just form the response without any conscious calculation.
Okay, so the million-dollar question is, how do we actually get there? Because if I know I need to stop translating, and I know I need to accept simple English, how do I physically train my brain to bypass the sheet music? If I drop the translation engine today, there is just empty silence in my head. What actually goes into building that direct reflex?
The answer provided by the 10-day challenge is surprisingly physical. You don't build the reflex by reading more grammar books. You build it by physically training the articulatory system.
Which introduces the core daily mechanic of these speak-up sessions, and that is shadowing.
Shadowing is the heavy lifting of this entire methodology. It is the act of listening to a native speaker say a sentence and then repeating that sentence out loud immediately, mimicking the rhythm and intonation as closely as possible.
I really want to break down why you just called it physical training. You mentioned the articulatory system. For those of us who aren't linguists, what does that actually mean mechanically? Why is speaking considered a physical act?
We tend to think of language as purely intellectual data, just floating in our minds. But speech is completely biomechanical. Think about the anatomy required just to produce a single word. You have to coordinate your diaphragm, your vocal cords, the position of your jaw, the exact placement of your tongue against the roof of your mouth, and the shape of your lips.
Wow, it's like a highly complex muscle choreography.
Exactly. And when you speak your native language, those specific muscles have been trained for decades. They have performed that exact choreography millions of times. The neural pathways commanding those muscles are incredibly thick and lightning fast.
Right.
But when you try to speak a new language, you are encountering phonemes, sounds that just do not exist in your native tongue. You're asking your tongue and jaw to form completely strange, totally alien shapes.
It's literally like going to a gym and doing a completely unfamiliar workout routine. Like, you might be generally strong, but if you do a totally new exercise, those specific stabilizing muscles are going to shake.
That is exactly what happens. In fact, on day 4 of the transcripts, there's this fascinating moment where Fizu admits to Masu. He says, "My mouth is a little tired, but I feel more confident."
His mouth is literally fatigued from speaking English.
Yes, because he is building new physical muscle memory. Shadowing forces your articulatory system to adapt to the new language through sheer repetition. You aren't just memorizing the definition of the words, you are training your facial muscles to produce the physical sounds effortlessly.
And the structure of the shadowing exercises Masu assigns is really deliberate, too. It's highly progressive. Like, they don't start by shadowing complex philosophical debates or BBC News broadcasts. They start with the most foundational, mundane phrases imaginable. Good morning. How are you today?
I'm doing well, thank you. Because those are the high-frequency anchors of daily interaction. By repeating "I'm doing well," thank you out loud 50 times, you completely bypass the translation engine. You aren't thinking about the subject-verb agreement of "I am." You are just mapping a physical reflex directly to a social prompt.
And once that foundation is laid, the transcripts show Masu pushing Fizu to shadow longer, connected chunks of thought. They move from "I'm good" to sentences like, "Hey, it's been a long time. How have you been? I've been thinking about you."
That progression into chunks is critical for natural pacing. Native speakers rarely construct sentences word by word in real time. They speak in pre-assembled chunks of meaning. Shadowing longer sentences teaches your brain to recognize and reproduce these chunks.
It makes it sound so much more fluid.
It also trains your ear to the prosody of the language, which is the musicality, the rise and fall of the pitch, where the emphasis lands. You really can't learn prosody from a textbook.
The sources also highlight this concept of expanding simple answers during the shadowing practice. For example, Masu won't let Fizu just shadow the phrase, "I'm good." He forces him to shadow natural extensions, like, "I'm doing well, thanks for asking, how are you?"
He is teaching the social pragmatics of the language.
Unpack social pragmatics for a second.
Pragmatics is how language is used in social contexts to achieve a goal. A conversation is not an interrogation where you just provide raw data. It is a ping-pong match. If someone asks how you are, and you just say, "I'm good," you have killed the rally. You hit the ball straight into the net.
Right, the conversation just dies there.
Exactly. Shadowing these extended phrases, like "thanks for asking, how are you," trains the reflex to automatically serve the ball back over the net. It builds conversational momentum.
Okay, I definitely see the value in building that momentum, but I have to play devil's advocate here. I know exactly what some listeners are thinking right now because I thought it myself when I read the transcripts.
Bring it on.
If I sit in my room and shadow 100 sentences, I am still just mimicking. I am a parrot. I am a tape recorder, just playing back someone else's thoughts. How does repeating a script actually teach me to generate my own original thoughts in a dynamic, unpredictable conversation?
It is a very common pushback against repetition drills. To understand why shadowing leads to generative fluency, we can look at a martial arts analogy.
Okay, I'm listening.
When you learn a martial art, you don't start by sparring in a chaotic fight.
Mm.
You start by standing in front of a mirror, drilling the exact same defensive block thousands of times. You repeat the motion endlessly. You aren't doing it to perform a choreographed dance. You are drilling it so that your muscles internalize the exact mechanics of the movement.
Right, so that when a real punch actually comes, you don't have to consciously think, okay, threat detected, I need to raise my left arm to a 45-degree angle to deflect the kinetic energy.
Exactly. The cognitive calculation is completely removed because the physical reflex is so deeply ingrained. Shadowing functions the exact same way for grammar.
I get the martial arts analogy, but martial arts is entirely physical. Language is, well, it's an intellectual pursuit. What happens when the conversation partner goes off script? If I just drill a block, what happens when they try to sweep my leg? If I just shadow specific sentences, how does that help me say something I've never shadowed before?
Because you aren't just memorizing a static string of words. Your brain is subconsciously extracting the underlying grammatical scaffolding. When you shadow a sentence like, I'm planning to visit my friend, and you repeat it 20 times, your brain internalizes the structural pattern of, I'm planning to verb my noun.
Ah, so the structure itself becomes a reflex.
Yes. So 3 weeks later, you are in a totally novel situation. You need to tell a coworker you are going to the grocery store. You don't have to consciously recall the grammar rules for expressing future intent. The scaffolding I'm planning to just rolls off your tongue automatically, and you simply plug in the new vocabulary. I'm planning to go to the store. Shadowing builds the templates. Your vocabulary just fills in the blanks.
That makes profound sense. You're building the grammatical scaffolding physically rather than intellectually.
Yeah.
You don't need to know the official name of the grammar rule if your mouth already knows exactly how it feels to say it correctly.
It bridges the gap between knowing and doing.
Okay, so we've trained the articulatory muscles, we've built the scaffolding, but sitting alone in your bedroom shadowing a YouTube video is a very safe, totally controlled environment. The effective filter is completely down. How do we transition from that safe space to the absolute chaos of the real world? How do we make sure those reflexes actually fire when the pressure is on?
That transition requires a complete departure from how most people study. The sources reveal a massive shift in Masu's methodology for Fizu here, which is abandoning grammar tables entirely in favor of contextual practice.
This was one of the most striking things about the entire 10-day dataset. I read through every single transcript, and there are essentially 0 traditional grammar lessons. Nobody is sitting in front of a whiteboard conjugating the verb to be. They rely almost exclusively on real-life situational roleplay.
Masu operates on the core principle that vocabulary and grammar rules are functionally useless in a vacuum. Knowing that the translation for the word water is nuoc in Vietnamese or agua in Spanish is merely trivia. Knowing how to navigate the social interaction of a busy restaurant to successfully acquire that water is a completely different skill set.
So they don't study lists of food vocabulary, they study the situation itself. The text focuses on highly specific, extremely common scenarios. Restaurants, shopping for clothes, asking for directions, meeting a friend at a cafe.
Right. And by role-playing these specific situations with Masu, Fizu is creating mental scripts.
I really want to explore this idea of scripts because it completely reframes how I think about conversation. It's like rehearsing a play. Let's look at the exact scripts they use in the source text, the restaurant script, for example. Masu doesn't teach Fizu to say, I am a single person who wishes to consume a meal. He teaches him the absolute highest utility phrase, table for one, please.
Short, efficient, and universally understood.
And then they practice the unpredictable back and forth. Masu plays the waiter and asks if Fizu wants something to drink. The script gives Fizu the prepared response. Just water, please. And then Masu throws a curveball. Still or sparkling?
That right there is the pure value of situational practice. Still or sparkling is a phrase you will hear in almost every restaurant, but it rarely shows up in beginner vocabulary lists. If you haven't rehearsed that specific interaction, the word sparkling will just crash your translation engine.
They also practice these incredible conversational buffers, like the phrase, take your time.
These scripts serve a vital psychological purpose. We discussed earlier how anxiety destroys your working memory. When the pressure is on in the real world, when the waiter is hovering or the barista is staring at you and there's a huge line of impatient people behind you, your cognitive resources plummet. If you have to invent a completely original sentence from scratch in that moment, you will freeze.
But if you have a rehearsed script, you don't have to invent anything. You just hit play.
Exactly. The cognitive load drops to near zero.
It makes me think of rehearsing a fire drill in elementary school. When the fire alarm goes off in a building, it is a high-stress, high-panic situation. The brain is not operating at its peak intellectual capacity. In that moment, you don't pull out a textbook on the chemical properties of combustion. You don't stand in the hallway calculating the oxygen levels or the structural integrity of the drywall.
A panic would paralyze you.
Right. Instead, you survive because you follow the exact exit route that you have physically walked down a dozen times before. You know that you walk down the hall, turn left at the stairs, and exit through the double doors. The scripts Masu teaches are essentially exit routes for social anxiety.
That is a phenomenal way to visualize it. You are building safety nets for when the alarm bells ring. Let's look at the direction script from the sources, because getting lost is perhaps the most panic-inducing scenario a language learner can possibly face. The effective filter is going to be absolutely maxed out.
Yes, the text highlights the exact safety net phrases for this. Masu drills Fizu to approach a stranger and say, "Excuse me, I'm looking for the train station. It's direct, it's polite, and it doesn't require complex grammar."
But the brilliance of Masu's roleplay isn't just asking the question. It's practicing how to comprehend the chaotic response. Because the stranger isn't going to speak slowly and perfectly. They're going to say something like, yeah, you just go straight for 2 blocks, take a left at the lights, and it's right past the pharmacy.
Which is completely overwhelming.
So Masu teaches Fizu a critical communicative strategy, the confirmation repetition. He trains Fizu to respond by summarizing the directions back to the stranger. Okay, so I go straight, then turn left.
That is so smart. It does 2 things. First, it ensures you actually understood the directions so you don't accidentally walk into a river. And second, it keeps you actively engaged in the conversation. It proves you're a participant rather than just nodding blankly with terrified eyes and walking away still completely lost.
Exactly.
We see the same practical focus in the shopping script. Masu has Fizu practice phrases like, "I'm looking for a shirt, and where is the fitting room?" And then the crucial follow-up, "Do you have this in a different color?"
And what's crucial to understand here is that by role-playing these scenarios, Fizu is deeply contextualizing the vocabulary. The term fitting room isn't just a disconnected set of letters on a flashcard anymore. It becomes neurologically linked to the physical action of holding a stack of clothes, scanning a store, and asking for assistance. It becomes a tool with a specific purpose.
And the sources show Fizu running through these role plays over and over with Masu until the pauses just disappear and the scripts sound totally natural, which honestly brings up a really practical objection.
Let's hear.
This level of practice, doing daily shadowing, running through intense situational role plays, drilling scripts until they are muscle memory, it sounds exhausting. It sounds like a full-time academic job. How does a normal, busy person, someone who works 9 to 5 and has a family, actually fit this methodology into their life without feeling completely overwhelmed and just quitting after a week? Because most people simply do not have 3 hours a day to sit around doing role plays.
This is perhaps the most actionable and surprisingly forgiving part of the entire methodology found in the sources. Masu addresses this exact concern with what we can call the 5 to 10 minute rule.
The daily integration.
Yes, the sources repeatedly, almost obsessively stress that you must practice the language every single day, even if it is only for 5 to 10 minutes.
Masu tells Fizu that consistency trumps duration.
Every single time. From a neuroplasticity standpoint, it is vastly more effective to practice 10 minutes a day, 7 days a week, than it is to practice for an intensive 3-hour block on a Sunday and do absolutely nothing the rest of the week.
I really want to understand the why behind that. Why doesn't the 3-hour block work as well? If I put in 3 hours of study on Sunday and you put in 10 minutes a day for a week, which is barely an hour total, shouldn't my 3 hours yield better results? It's literally triple the time investment.
It comes down to how your brain decides which information is worth keeping and which information should be deleted. This involves a biological process called synaptic pruning. Think of your brain like a very ruthless garden manager.
Okay, I like a gardening analogy.
Your brain is constantly receiving billions of pieces of data every day. It cannot possibly store all of them, so it constantly looks for signals of utility. When you engage with a new language every single day, even for just 5 minutes, you are sending a daily repetitive signal to the garden manager that says, hey, we use these neural connections every day. They are important for our survival and daily functioning. Do not prune them, water them.
So frequency signals importance.
Exactly. A 3-hour binge on Sunday, followed by a 6-day break, sends the exact opposite signal. The brain says, oh, this was a temporary low-priority task. We haven't needed this information in 4 days. It's safe to pull up those weeds to make room for more relevant data. It will literally start to dismantle the neural pathways you spent 3 hours building because it assumes you just don't need them anymore.
Wow, use it or lose it down to a literal biological level. So how do we actually execute this daily 5 to 10-minute integration? The transcripts outline three very specific, slightly unconventional habits that Masu gives to Fizu. And the first one is talking to yourself.
Yes, the sources highly recommend the practice of narrating your daily life out loud to train your brain to think in the target language.
Okay, I have to stop here. Narrating my life out loud. Won't my family or my roommates think I have literally lost my mind if I am walking around my kitchen in the morning muttering, I am making coffee, I am pouring the water is hot.
The sources anticipate exactly this reaction. It is universally awkward. The text admits that it feels weird and silly at first. Fizu even says to Masu, I feel silly talking to myself in my apartment. But Masu explains that pushing through that exact feeling of silliness is the entire point of the exercise.
How does feeling silly help you learn a language?
Because that feeling of silliness is just your ego trying to protect your dignity. And as we established in our discussion about the affective filter earlier, the ego is the primary obstacle to fluency. By deliberately talking to yourself out loud in the kitchen, you are practicing producing the language without the pressure of an audience. You are safely building the physical muscle memory of speech, and more importantly, you are forcing your brain to interact with your immediate physical environment in the target language.
That makes total sense. If I'm cooking and I say out loud, I am cutting the vegetables, it directly connects the vocabulary to a physical action. And it also seems like a great way to expose the gaps in your knowledge, right? You might be narrating your cooking and suddenly realize, wait, I actually have no idea how to say spatula in this language.
Precisely. It is active, contextual learning in real time. It basically turns your entire house into a vocabulary classroom.
The second daily habit Masu highlights is active listening. But he includes a very specific caveat about how to actually consume media. He tells Fizu to use podcasts, music, and YouTube videos daily, but he demands a change in how Fizu uses subtitles.
This is a critical adjustment. So many learners watch foreign films or YouTube videos with subtitles turned on in their native language, thinking it helps them understand the plot while, passively absorbing the sound.
You're right, the whole idea of passive absorption.
The sources advise completely against this. If you're watching an English video and reading Vietnamese subtitles, your brain is just reading Vietnamese. It is incredibly efficient at finding the path of least resistance. It will dedicate all its cognitive resources to reading the language it already knows, and it will completely tune out the audio of the target language as just background noise.
So you aren't actually practicing English at all, you're just practicing your native reading speed.
Exactly. Masu advises Fizu to exclusively use target language subtitles. If you're watching an English video, you must use English subtitles.
What is the neurological benefit of doing that?
It forces the brain to build a bridge between the written word, which as a learner you probably already recognize, and the spoken sound that you're trying to acquire. Often learners know a word on paper, but they don't recognize it when a native speaker actually says it because the pronunciation is different than they expected.
Because native speakers blend words together, they drop syllables, they speak too fast.
Right. Target language subtitles train your ear to decode that natural rhythm. It connects the visual symbol with the auditory reality.
The final piece of this daily integration is what Masu calls the rule of immediate usage. And the transcripts show him being very strict about this with Fizu. If Fizu learns a new vocabulary word during a session, and over the 10 days they cover words like confident, frustrated, rewarding, and managing, Masu demands that Fizu use that specific word in a spoken sentence that exact same day.
It is entirely about forcefully moving the vocabulary from passive memory into active memory.
Explain the difference between the two for us.
Passive memory is vocabulary. You can recognize when you read it or hear it, but you can't recall it on demand when you want to speak. Active memory is the vocabulary you have instant access to. If you just read the definition of the word rewarding on a flashcard, it will likely disappear from your brain in a week. But if you force yourself to walk into your living room and say out loud, learning this language is a rewarding challenge, you have actively manipulated the word.
You've basically taken ownership of it.
Yes, you have contextualized it. You have signaled to that internal garden manager that this specific tool is now in the active toolbox and is ready to be used.
It all comes back to treating the language as a physical tool, a utility, rather than just an academic subject to be studied and tested on.
That is the core philosophy here.
Okay, let's zoom out a bit and summarize this ultimate roadmap to effective speaking practice that we've extracted from these 10 days of the Speak Up sessions. If you really want to break the freeze, first, you have to realize that the freeze itself is an emotional reaction, not an intellectual failure. You have to lower the affective filter by fundamentally embracing messy mistakes. Perfect grammar is not the goal. Successful communication is the goal.
Second, you absolutely have to dismantle the internal translation engine. Stop translating from your native language and start building direct pathways using the dog method. Accept the simple English tip: downgrade your complex thoughts to maintain speed. Play by ear, don't read the sheet music.
Third, you have to recognize that speaking is a biomechanical act. You have to physically train your articulatory muscles and build grammatical scaffolding through daily shadowing. You have to be okay with your mouth literally feeling tired.
Fourth, abandon the isolation of grammar tables in favor of contextual practice. Rehearse real-life scripts for high-stress situations like restaurants, shopping, and getting lost so you have cognitive safety nets when the pressure is really on.
And finally, implement the 5 to 10 minute rule. Harness neuroplasticity by integrating the language daily. Narrate your life out loud in your kitchen, bridge the gap between reading and listening with target language subtitles, and immediately use any new vocabulary to lock it into your active memory. It is a complete paradigm shift in how we approach language learning.
It really is.
Yeah.
And if we look at the so what of all this, why we put ourselves through this grueling, awkward process in the first place, it reminds us that language is fundamentally a mechanism for human connection. The barista or the stranger on the street does not care if you mixed up your past participles or used the wrong tense. They care about what you are trying to share with them. The barrier to fluency isn't your lack of vocabulary, it's your willingness to be vulnerable and communicate imperfectly.
Which leaves us with a really fascinating, almost philosophical thought to mull over. We spend so much energy trying to perfectly replicate our native language personality in a new language. But in our native language, we are often heavily guarded. We use big words to sound smart, articulate, and perfectly put together. We are constantly managing our image and our ego.
We use complexity as a shield to hide our insecurities.
Yes, exactly. What if speaking a new language, with all its messy mistakes, its forced simplicity, and its awkward stumbles, isn't actually a limitation? What if it's an opportunity? By stripping away all that native language ego, maybe speaking a new language is about unlocking a slightly different, more humble, and ultimately braver version of yourself.
A version of you that is willing to be a clumsy beginner again, just for the chance to connect with someone new.
I think that's a brilliant way to reframe the struggle. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Now, the absolute best thing you can do with this information is to act on it immediately. Go out, find a mirror, or just walk into your kitchen and speak your very next thought out loud. Embrace the messy mistakes. We'll see you next time.